Morning, Jared. How we doing? Morning, Benny. How we doing? Tired and greasy. Interesting. Paul, how we doing? You'll have to forgive the Paul Orchard. How we going? Brad Tao. How we going? You're gonna have to forgive the late and slow start today. I have not been the greatest these last 2 days. I've had some serious vertigo happening, so forgive me if I seem a little what's got to Ford today. Yeah, 30 miles an hour, that's pretty good. Oh, Forge, right. Morning, Bob. Morning, evening, Wiley. How are we? The light bulb died. That sounds like fun, Jared. Hey, Sean. Hey, Randy. Hey, Ben. How you doing? Yeah, vertigo does suck. We don't know what's causing it at the moment. Um, Safe to say, I feel pretty fucking shattered. Um, just trying to work through it, but it's meant that I'm not really doing much in the public sphere at the moment. Just kind of trying to live. I fired up the postbox forge for the first time yesterday to cure the Satanite. I probably look really pale right now. No idea what's going wrong with me at the moment. Staying alive. So yeah, I have no idea what I'm doing today. I was going to work on those scissors, but after they cooled down, I took a pretty close look. And much to my dismay. The cold chops are pretty nasty at the transitions on both. This one is harder to see, but yeah, it's right there. And on this side, it cuts in quite a way. There's no way for me to repair them effectively. So these are useless. So I'll have to start again, but I don't think I have the coordination. Clan lawn clippings, cool. Hey Ed, thanks for checking in. Hey Hans, how are you going? Did you get my message on Instagram, Hans? I saw that you saw it. I'm just not sure if you got it. Yeah, postbox forges are cool, Bob. They're very useful for very specific bunch of stuff. Yeah, 4 hours or less sleep. Yeah, I mean, I'm getting the sleep. It's just the fucking vertigo. It's taking it out of me. Well, that's kind of the thing, Sean. Nothing's really changed in my habits. It's just this is what's happening at the moment. I think it could be blood pressure related. Could be a bunch of things. So yeah, unfortunately the scissors will have to wait for another live stream when I'm feeling physically up to it. Ringing again today. As you can. Oh, see what it was. It'd help if I knew what I was trying to make today. Feel free to shout out any ideas. Hopefully something. Yeah, it could be an inner ear thing, but my ears are fine. I haven't had like a infection or anything, so. Eventually, I'll get checked out. Probably Monday. It's been raining on and off every day. Hey, Bryson. Yeah, well, Washington's kind of known for it, isn't it? So I have no idea what I'm making today, if I'm making anything. Fucking, my head is so not on my shoulders today. So, any ideas? No recurve. It sounds like a lot of work. I really don't like recurve blades anyway. Sorry, Randy. Not really my style. I'm not done with the tongue project, but I don't feel like I have the energy to swing a hammer for that long today. I have been working on some hex hawks. There will be a couple of hex hawks available very soon. I have these two forged out, ready for grinding at some point. Apparently need to work on these a bit more. blades are just a little bit over thick. I could talk gas forge design and theory if you like. Something I can do. Yeah, I've got a personal marking knife. I made one for my pegboard. Yeah, Damascus styles is something I can talk about. I've been walking Sean Pittard through various Damascus things. Currently he's working on a billet of W's. That light is really annoying. To a place where you're not backed by light beams. Bring out the whiteboard. I'm planning on getting a blackboard put up in here, but it's been a process getting this place put together. Railroad's like. Back in a second. Hey, Aaron. Wheel of Fortune project. Yeah, well, anyone who's good at making apps, feel free to have a go. Hey Shelby, welcome to this channel. I wish it was brought to you by Skillshare. Sponsorship would not go astray right now. But of course, I am sponsored by my wonderful patrons. Without whom this channel would have shut down a long time ago. Yeah, fair enough, Randy. It's a good way to go about it. Unfortunately, diamond stones do tend to scar up the blades quite badly. Yeah, no, the new microphone's amazing. Hey, Zachary, how it going? Yeah, those Blue Yetis, amazing. So, hey, Soggy Bottom, how you going? Yeah, cool, William. That's a good idea. Those kits pretty cool. Hey, Lucas. So, sadly I won't be forging today, but we already have 2 suggestions. Damascus theory or forge theory? Which one do you guys want to hear about? Gas forges or Damascus? Yeah, you can hear the chooks in the background. Jan is very vocal. Gas forges. Okay, well there's 1 vote for gas forges, which counts for 2 because he's a patron. That's how it works, isn't it? So we have quite a few for forges. Forges. 1 for Damascus. So 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm not sure if Zachary's. No, he doesn't want Damascus. So I'm going to count that as 5, 6. One, 2, 3. 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, we're kind of even at the moment. Ooh, forges is overtaken by 1. So okay, there's 5 each. Damascus and forges. We need a tiebreak. Come on. Okay, we got 6 for the forge. You can make anything you want to send to me. Okay, Ben. I made it. No, I'm joking. Question is files and miles still do Damascus? Well, you can't ask me that question. We're either doing Damascus theory or we're doing forge theory. At the moment, we have 6 to 5 for the forges. Hey, Donut, how you going, mate? Well, there's 6 to 6, so we're still tied for. We have 21 people watching and 12 votes. 6 of them forges and 6 of them Damascus. So cast your vote now. Do, 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 do. All right, the next. Waiting. Oh, there's another one. Damascus. Shelby wants Damascus. Well, I'm going to take Hans's as being Damascus. Shelby wants Damascus, and oh, Damascus is taking over. Gas Damascus. Maybe I'll do another live stream where I'll talk about gas forges and their theory. But it looks like we're doing today. Well, we'll do forges first, and then we'll see if we've got time to do Damascus as well. Not Damascus. We'll do Damascus first, and then we'll talk about forges. Because forges are necessary to Damascus, obviously. Right, so, yeah, no, we'll start on Damascus theory. I should set myself up in a better place. Really wish I had. Do I have any? Okay. Give me a second, I'm going to set up a whiteboard so that I can actually explain the shit in visuals as well as anything else. That ain't gonna do it. That ain't gonna do it either. Where can I steal a tech screw from? It's always annoying when you run out of tech screws. I kind of took all the ones that I can. I wonder if that's... That will do. Unplug the phone. Come with me. Hopefully we don't lose signal over here. Okay, so Damascus theory. I've already done a video on the basics of scrap Damascus, and so this will basically be a recap of that. So we'll start from the very beginning, which is obviously that any Damascus is going to be a mixture of two or more contrasting steels. So for this instance, we're going to have red be our high nickel steel. Okay, we're not going to have red be our high nickel steel because apparently this is dead. Let's see if blue works. Blue works. Okay, blue is going to be our high carbon steel, and hopefully we can find something contrasting to blue. What about green? Green will work. That doesn't work very well. Okay. You can't even see that. Right, anyway, so we have blue, and blue contrasts with blue really well, as we all know. That sucks. Anyway, so we need two contrasting materials. Normally you'll see people talking about stuff like 1084 and 15N20, or 1095 and 15N20. 15N20 tends to be the main material that's used as a contrasting material because 15N20 is chemically identical to 1084, except it's got a higher nickel content, which means it's slightly more oxidation resistant. So it's a little bit more etch resistant. It's a little bit more, stainless, if you want to call it that, though it's not actually a stainless steel. So 15N20, because it's chemically very similar to 1084, heat treats exactly the same, has the same hardness, has the same red hardness, so it moves the same under the hammer. And that's something to keep in mind when you're making Damascus. So Lucas, I believe, was the one who asked recently if you can make Damascus out of file steel and mild steel. The answer is yes, but. So file steel and mild steel, file steel being high carbon, and there are two main elements to a steel that cause it to blacken. So The first one is percentage of carbon, and then percentage of manganese. I'm not sure if you can read that. My writing's terrible. So percentage of carbon, percentage of manganese is for darkness, and then for lightness, you have, so this is dark, and then light is simply percentage of nickel. There are a couple of other things. So these two are things to keep in keep in mind. The higher the content of nickel, the lighter it'll be. The higher percentage of carbon, the darker it will be. Then the higher percentage of manganese, the darker it'll be as well. So when you have file steel is normally associated with something like 1095. So file steel will be 1095, W1 or W2. That's what we assume it to be, unless in this case we normally have a carbon percentage of about 1.2, so 1.0 to 1.2 is supposed to have 0.95% carbon, but it has a range from 0.9, I believe, or 0.85 up to 1.2% carbon. And it has very low alloying content, so it has very low alloys in all three of these configurations. I believe that 1095 has a slightly higher manganese content, but W1 and W2 have a minimal amount of manganese, but they do etch quite dark. Mild steel, so if we're talking A36 or 1018, we're talking about a carbon content of 0.2 or 0.15 to 0.29, well below the hardenability area, right? So most steels, it is recognized in metallurgical circles that any steel that is below 0.4% carbon is not what we would call traditionally hardenable. Whether or not they have carbon in solution that can be transferred into martensite doesn't really matter, because the appreciable hardness will not increase across the entire cross-section of material if the percentage of carbon is below 0.4%. So that's why 1040 is kind of the lowest carbon material you will use to make hammers, because that has minimum 0.4% carbon, maximum 0.45, I think, percent carbon. But these two steels, whilst they will cost because of the higher carbon content, and there's probably a slight amount of manganese in here as well, depending on which of these materials was used by the company to make the file, will be much more red hard than this material. So when you forge, if you've got your file steel, I'm just going to make some teeth in this file steel. I'm going to sandwich that with some mild steel. Let's say we're making a 4-layer billet, so I'm going to make some teeth. I'm going to make a mild steel bar. Okay, so if this is our billet, our very poorly drawn Damascus billet, 4 layers. So the file is going to be our dark material. I'm going to have to color it in. I was hoping to be able to use red, but that's fine. So file is going to be our dark material, mild is going to be our light material. They're going to forge at different rates. So what's going to end up happening is that as we change the cross section, so as we forge down on this, what's going to end up happening is the file steel will maintain its rectangular cross section, but the mild steel is going to mushroom out. And so you can see this is our file steel, this is our file steel. And the same thing happens if you use wrought iron in the place of mild steel, especially wrought iron, because wrought iron is very, very soft. So what ends up happening is you have mushrooming, and if you were to turn that in the 90 degrees and forge it flush, what would end up happening is you'd have your file steel. So this is your file steel. And then the mushrooming would actually coat the file steel, the mushrooming coming out of the mild steel. And not only that, but you would notice that the mild steel would become much thinner, much faster than your file steel. So in this case, you'd end up with, if you had equal thicknesses, if you were to take this into a, make believe that these are similar thicknesses, then the file steel would maintain its size while the mild steel squished down. So you'd end up with very, very thin light layers and very, very thick dark layers, purely because the steel is going to move at different rates. I'm just going to go clean the board off. So it's important to keep in mind when forging Damascus that you're using chemically similar materials, or if you're not, to keep in mind that they're going to move at very different rates dependent on their carbon content, because the higher the carbon content, the slower they'll move. And then there's also things like the higher the chromium content, the slower they'll move. As my friend Alex recently found out, 52100, because it is relatively high chromium and incredibly high carbon, moves much slower under the hammer than any other steel that he's ever worked with. It's seriously hard stuff under the hammer. So it's really important for you to keep that in mind when you come to forge something. That's why 52100 makes a really good Sanmai, because the central core doesn't move. So it's a lot easier to get the whole thing put together right. I'm just going to put another screw in this. It's really annoying me. Now it ain't going nowhere. So yeah, once you've established that you've got your light and dark materials, so let's say that we're using 1520 and 1084. Just to touch on the mild steel thing again, because it is unhardenable, you can't make a blade out of file steel and mild steel Damascus. Well, you can, it just won't be a very good blade, because you may have mild steel crossing the edge, at which point that is unhardenable material and won't actually hold an edge. If you're going to make mild steel and file steel Damascus, which I have done, and I've actually made a straight razor using file steel and mild steel Damascus, but what I did was use a 52100 core with the file steel and mild steel cladding, so that the cladding gave you the Damascus look. The core was fully hardenable material, and that's something to keep in mind. So if we were to make a billet, let's say of 1084 and 1520. So high nickel, high carbon, 1084 being a high manganese steel as well. And we were to layer that up, 6 layers, about equal. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And so ones with the X in it are high carbon steel. So we've got 1084, 15 and 20, 1084, 15 and 20, 1084 to 15 and 20. If we were to forge weld that, now it doesn't, so this isn't a forge welding how-to. I might do one of those in the future, and I'll actually do that whilst making a billet because I think it'll be easier to explain a lot of the concepts surrounding what happens in the forge weld in that instance. But we're going to take for granted that we can just forge weld anything together we want, and we're going to forge weld these together. We're going to squat them down a little bit, and we're going to create a square. So we're going to create a billet that is, this is a terrible square, but it's going to have 6 pieces, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we've forged it down, we've got our square billet. Now this is what we would call straight layer or random pattern Damascus. So random pattern can be a pattern that's forged in like with the dies and stuff like that to make a random like assortment of compressions. But I would still call that patterned Damascus rather than random pattern. I'm just going to check that my chat is actually working. Okay, sorry guys, the chat wasn't working, I was just seeing nothing. So if we have a square billet of Damascus, which is really important for the next step, if we're going to make mosaic, right, so if we're going to make mosaic Damascus, we want to make something that is going to be, you know, tiled and put on edge to show like an explosion. Let's go into an explosion pattern, because this is basically what I'm leading Sean to. Hey Bobby, Aaron Finn, Westhold Forge, file and leaf spring. File and leaf spring is a very bad idea. There are, hey Paul Fontanini that is. Okay. Sorry guys, yeah, the chat wasn't working. Thanks, Wiley. Thanks for the test. So, with the Damascus now established, we have our high carbon, low carbon mix. 6 layers. It's a relatively low layer Damascus. All right, Jared. Thanks for ducking out, man. Thanks for ducking in, I should say. If we're going to make W's out of this, which is crushed W's is the basis for pretty much every mosaic pattern Damascus. It's not the only start for a mosaic pattern, but it is one of the basic starts. If you're making feather pattern, if you're making explosion pattern, if you're making a lot of other stuff, you're going to want to use crushed W's. But crushed W's are not this straight layer, right? If we were to draw this out with the layers running horizontal. So what we need to do is turn these onto the 90. But if we're going to turn them onto the 90, we need to first turn them onto the 45. So we're going to make this square like this. This is a diamond, not a square, Sam. You suck. So we're going to turn it onto the side, and we're going to forge these sides in to create an octagon. So now you're going to watch me make a really shitty octagon, and I'm going to make it way larger than I need to, because drawing an octagon is always fun. And here, what's going to happen is you're going to actually end up curving these materials like this, and you're going to end up with opposing curves, right? If that makes sense. I think I actually put too many lines in there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, I did. Let's kill that one, and let's just make that a high carbon, low carbon, high carbon, low carbon, high carbon. Okay, so now we've turned it on its axis and we've forged these in. Those straight layers, when forged on the 45, are going to cup towards the edges. Then when we forge it, rotate it 90 degrees completely and forge it down into a bar cross section, back to like a flat bar like this, what you're going to end up seeing is this. Again, I think I drew too many lines in. And so that would be our high carbon, high carbon, high carbon. You see how, because we've cupped the edges in the 45, we now have these kind of C shapes at the ends of the bar. And this is the end of the flat bar we're talking about. So what we want to then do is, once we've drawn this bar out to, you know, say 1/8 of an inch or something like that, then what we want to do is then stack this up. So we'd have, let's say, 4 pieces. And each of these, let's say we flipped it. So there's 1, 2, 3. I'm going to try and match this as much as I can. That's probably a little bit intense. Okay. So we've got our cupped pieces. What we want to do is etch ends of the bar to see where the pattern is, especially if we've got a low layer even count where there's going to be a high carbon and a low carbon on the outside edges. I'm going to flip it around. So instead of having the high carbon together, we're going to go high carbon, low carbon. You see how that is? So you've got low carbon here, high carbon there. Thanks, Hans. So yeah, we're going to go high carbon, low carbon, high carbon, low carbon. Again. And then high carbon, low carbon again here. Did I do that right? Yeah, I did that right. It's fine. I'm just a crappy drawer. So we've got low carbon, high carbon, low carbon, high carbon, high carbon, low carbon, high carbon, low carbon. And that's going to mix the billet up quite nicely. And when we forge that down, what we'll end up with is, instead of these very separate kind of things, we're going to end up with something that looks like this. Oh, that was terrible. Jesus, Sam. Learn to draw. And so that's basically what your pattern is going to look like. And that is crushed W's, because if you look closely, if I'm going to draw a blown up view, well, I don't have to, I can just bring you in. Hopefully that's visible. If you look at it side on, you can see W, 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 W. So that is crushed W's. Damn it, Jim, I'm a bladesmith, I'm not an illustrator. Correct. So we've gone from straight pattern, turned it 45, forged it into an octagon, turned it 45 again to bring it on edge, and forged the C's, and then stacked the C's and forge welded them together to make crushed W's. Now, the number of crushed W's you have will just depend on the layers. So you could double this again, cut the billet in half and make another layer of W's. And if we were to make a feather pattern, we would take this W billet and drive a wedge, a flat-topped wedge, through the billet to drag those W's down to create those feather-like patterns. But what we're talking about today is not feathers, we're talking about mosaic. So we've already established that W's have been made. Here's our crushed W billet, prepared to be welded. So we weld that up. What we're going to do is exactly the same thing we did here. Right? We're going to forge it on the 45, but in this case, we're going to square it to the 45. So what we're going to do is turn that billet on its side, or on the diagonal, like this, and we're going to square it to this, so that instead of having the W's running this way, right, so we're going to have the W's running this way. So let's just quickly, fucking, whatever. So there's our W's, we've turned them on the 45, and then we re-square it. So then the square becomes this way. Now, what we should have is a square with the W's running like this. So you can see that we've got this kind of lines. Now they will cup slightly, like they did with this forging, but it won't be as dramatic because we've already got the cupping from the W's themselves. So once we forge that, and obviously we wouldn't turn it that way to get this, you get what I mean. You see what I mean. But then what we've got then is a bar with this being our end pattern. So what we want to do is then cut that bar, hopefully drawing it out to a length. So, you know, like say that's the end of our bar. I'm getting fucking fancy here, I'm doing 3D. Right, so that's our square bar, and we have the diagonal W's pattern here. What we want to do then is to form equal parts, and I know that's not equal, don't challenge me, and then stack them up so that they're in this orientation. Oh my god, that's really not square. Okay, there we go. And when we do this, we're going to orientate the bars yeah, sure, Hans, I'll get right on that. Hey, Kat, I'm going. Yeah, my ways more. This is true. So yeah, we will have to ferry flip it in the end, but what we can do is orientate the bar so that we have this kind of thing happening. And this requires you to etch the billet right. So you can see how it's exploding from this. It looks like it's exploding from the center because you have all the lines traveling diagonally outwards. And what you would do is etch the end of each billet to give you the right orientation. And then you tack weld this up, and you can do it by hand. You need to be working very quick, and you need to forge from both that side and that side. If you have a press, then you can use squaring dies. So basically you can have 2 pieces of angle iron on your press dies that create a diamond shape when they're pushed together. You put your billet in there like that and force it all together in one dimension, because that way it'll forge weld all the sides at the same time. And once you have that, and you've forge welded it, you have the basis for explosion pattern Damascus. Am I making sense so far? Final photograph, just in case you want to pause it later. always go back and pause it. I'll leave it up. Yeah, definitely forge, weld some reins onto some forge, weld some reins onto some tongs and stuff. This is purely a mosaic Damascus idea, right? So if you want to make just Damascus blades, then you stop at the position 1, which was forge welding straight layers together, forge them down into a bar and draw them out. Thanks, Shelby. So once we've got our bar, we're going to forge that down into a rectangular cross section. I'm going to make them quite large now, just to show you what I'm talking about. So we're going to forge that explosion pattern down. So it's still our squares, and it's still got our explosion pattern going through it. And this is how boring it would look if it was straight layers. So you could do straight layers. Keeping them straight after forging them on the 45 is very difficult, but the W's make it much more interesting because it looks like shock waves coming out of an explosion. So once we have our explosion pattern Damascus, right, we're going to have a long rectangular bar. Again, I'm going to draw in 3D to make my life hard. What we're going to need to do with this bar is cut it at a 35 degree angle. 33 to 35 degrees. And this is where it becomes really difficult for people who don't have a metal cutting bandsaw or a metal cutting drop saw. If you've got like one of those chop saws, it's really useful. If you've got a metal cutting bandsaw, even better. If you don't have either of those things, it is still possible with an angle grinder, and I want to try that one day, but it makes it a lot more difficult. The other thing that is really nice to use for this is a surface grinder or a mill. If you don't have either of those things, it is still possible, it's just a lot harder. So, there are 2 methods to get from here to having this on the sides of your blade. The first is the ferry flip. So if we are looking at the side of our, so this is the bar we've got. The end shows the pattern. So the end, the pattern is here, right? We're going to cut at a 33 to 35 degree angle tiles. I'm going to make multiple cuts, equidistant, try and make them the same size. And that way, we're going to have this end pattern now being able to be turned this way to make a weld seam. Lots lost in kerf, absolutely. Incredibly a lot of loss. And that's why a metal cutting bandsaw is a lot better for this than drop saw. Hey, White North. So, once we've cut our tiles, you're going to number them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Let's say we've got 7 pieces. And we're going to lay them out. We're going to flip one this way, right? So we're going to flip that way and then that way. And then we're going to flip that way and then we're going to flip that way. And this way, you're going to book match each piece. Kyle does it a really interesting way where he'll go 1, and then, 1, 1, 2, and etc. like that. And he'll match them that way. Ooh, nice. Milwaukee Porterband and third blades. Very nice. So you'll flip, yep, that one that way, 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 etc., etc. To book match all of the patterning until you have a billet that has a 33-degree angle on it, is straight across, and then there's a 33-degree angle that way. We're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And so now what we should have is what was here is now here. And a quick tip, if you're going to do this, is what you can do is make a separate tile back here, one with a square end, out of pure 1084 or 15 and 20. And that can be your tang, so that you don't lose all of this beautiful mosaic that you just made to your tang. So therefore you have an excess piece of material which is still as hardenable as the rest, but that can be your tang rather than having the pattern disappear into the tang. So the pattern can be all the way along the blade, and you can get a bigger blade out of it as well that way. So once we've got this, we're going to weld all of the seams. You can do it with a MIG welder, but most people do it with a TIG welder. All of the seams entirely down the entire blade. You can weld to a bar backing. Some people like to weld all of these to a mild steel bar, like that. And what they do is they clamp them down, weld along the base, and then they weld all the seams anyway. And then you can either weld to that mild steel bar, which normally they do, and then they just grind it off later, or they simply just weld. They simply paint white out on the bar itself to stop it from welding. But I would prefer to weld to that bar at that stage, because that way I'm guaranteeing that it's going to support that material. So yeah, if you're going to do it this way with the mild steel bar attached, because you're going to have less likelihood of shearing these welds in the welding phase. And you're only going to want to forge it in this dimension. So make sure you keep it relatively thick. You want to be, I think Kyle Royer has it 3/4 of an inch. His tiles are 3/4 of an inch high. So that would be 3/4 of an inch wide in the cut. You can make it higher. You can make it, 25, so an inch high. The higher they are, the more welding plane you get, the less likely of shearing. But it'll all depend on how much material you have. Yes, you need to weld all of the seams. It's not a weld that does well with borax, because the flux gets trapped inside these seams, and if the flux gets trapped in those seams, that's it, the weld's gone. Because you're putting a lot of shear stress on this. In a normal welding plane, you have one piece of material and another piece of material, and the force is dimensionally this way, right? You're just smashing them together. In this one, you have a piece of material with an angle on it, meeting another piece of material with an angle on it, but the force is still this way. And so what wants to happen is that this one wants to shoot that way, and that one wants to shoot this way. Right, so without having the seams completely welded, A, your shear stress is just going to push them apart, and B, any flux that is in here is going to seep into these areas, because what will happen is that as the compression hits, these toes will push apart a little bit and leave you with a seam of borax. Hey, old wolf, how you going? So yeah, you definitely need to weld the seams on these kinds of billets. And that's one of the other disadvantages, is then you have to grind out all of the seams, because that weld material is not good for Damascus. But once you've completed that, be back in a second. So once you've completed that tiling process, and once you've completed all the welding, what you will have is this. So this is explosion pattern Damascus. Hopefully it's clear how those W's make the pattern. And you can see that this has actually been welded onto a piece of 5160 as the tang material rather than a piece of 1084. But 1084 would have been better because 5160 really doesn't like to weld. So yeah, that is the explosion pattern Damascus that we're discussing in this photo, in this little demonstration. Now this is a slight variation on the pattern that I've just been discussing, because this was 4-wayed twice. This has been coffee etched, funnily enough, but it's not hardened, so therefore the contrast isn't very good. That's something to be realized about Damascus, is that the etch doesn't work properly until after the billet is hardened. So that's why people get disappointed when they first trial etch their billets and it doesn't show up as very contrasty as what they like. So yeah, for those of you who don't know, this billet was actually made by mastersmith Kyle Royer, and what I'm teaching you right now was actually taught to me in a symposium seminar that Kyle did on making mosaic Damascus. So yeah, there's how I know how to do this. Now, hopefully everyone understands the tiling method. Yes, less cleanup with TIG. Also, you can simply seal the billet using the billet's material rather than adding filler rod. The thing with MIG is that you're adding filler rod, which means that you've got a lot more to remove. And if you use TIG, if you use MIG along these seams, right? So I'll do it on this one, even though it's not the fairy flip one. If you use MIG, you're going to have these lumps, right, of weld. You want to grind those off before you forge weld. Otherwise, what you will be doing is pushing that material into your billet even more. And you'll end up having to grind out a lot more of your original billet than you would like. With TIG, all you're doing is taking a small puddle of the original material and just removing it by melting it into itself. You don't have to use filler rod, which is very useful. Now, hopefully everyone understands the tiling method. This is the method that Kyle uses, and this is the method that most people use. It is sometimes called the Ferry flip or the Felicietti flip. Stephen Felicietti was the man who originally developed this, and he's actually an Australian. He lives in Tasmania, funnily enough. So he also, Tom Ferry kind of said that he made up the idea, but he actually didn't. It was Steve Felicietti. And there's been a lot of argument about that. And there are some people in the Australian community that get very upset if you say ferry flip. But either is correct. It is simply tiling, Damascus tiling. So, now, there is a second method, a slightly more dangerous, but also somehow also easier. So this is an easier, but more I don't know. It puts a lot more stress on your material. And this is known as the accordion cut. Now, a lot of people will know about the accordion cut, and there are two different ways to do the accordion cut, funnily enough. I'm going to show you both. So, first accordion cut, we have the same thing. We have our bar, again with the pattern on the end. And I'm going to show you a second bar. And these are both the same bar. They've both got their material with the pattern running in lines this way. All right, so that's the way the pattern is running right now. Now, the accordion cut has two methods. The first method is called either chunking or triangle cuts. And what you do is actually take an angle grinder or a bandsaw, and you would remove this material along the bar. Equidistant, equal cuts. So as you can see, you're cutting out material, and that means that in these cuts, in the ends of these cuts, you're going to see that pattern. And so what you do is cut this material out and then forge it out into your final bar. And in that final bar, because you took those accordion cuts out, you will have spaces along here where you'll have the original, where you'll have the end grain. Now the difference between the accordion cut and the tiling is that in the tiling, as you can see, the pattern is completely uninterrupted, right? It's completely perfectly repeating. In this method, right, if I was to turn the bar towards us, so this is the top of the bar now, we would have a similar thing where we'd have, you know, a square of our explosion, and it would be backed up to each other. So, you know, we'd have blah, 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 and then we'd have blah, 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 blah. Hopefully you're getting what I'm driving at. So this is our pattern. Because we've cut down into it like this and spread it open, we'll get the tops of the pattern. But then what we'll have is a space of just random pattern, and then we'll have that same block repeating, right? So we'll have that same two pieces of repeating pattern. And then we'll have another space of random pattern. And the reason for that is because you've got to remember that we're going to be leaving this section here to forge down on, right? So this is not going to create an even, uninterrupted pattern like tiling will. It will have explosion, random, explosion, random, explosion, random, explosion, random. Yeah, it's basically a super wide ladder pattern. Now the advantage of this is that you don't have to go through the tiling method. The disadvantages, and there are a couple, is that you're losing a lot more material to cutting out these triangles, because remember, you're losing the size of the kerf, plus you're losing these chunks of steel, right? You turn these chunks, depending on the size of the chunks, you could turn them into other knives and stuff, little baby carving knives and stuff. But you also get this interrupted pattern, right? The second method is basically the same as this one, except you're not removing as much material. Instead, you make vertical cuts. Vertical cut, vertical cut, vertical cut, vertical cut. Opposing vertical cuts. You could do it with an angle grinder, you could do it with a hacksaw. You want to do them to the same depth from both sides. And you can see that, you know, you've got a line of them coming from the bottom, line of them coming from the top. And then when you heat this up, you would use a hot cut, your hot cut hardy, to drive those open, right? So you would end up going along, and you want to do this really slowly. You don't want to drive them open all at once. You would want to go, you know, 1, 2, 3, 3, 4, along the whole length, using the hot cut to slowly open each individual cut just slowly, and you'd go multiple heats getting it out there until finally you would get to the point where you would have very, very similar pattern to this, right? But you're losing a lot less material. The disadvantage of this one, and something that I've seen mentioned a few times for people, is you want to drill each end point of your cut. Right? You want to take a high carbon drill bit, you want to take a decent drill bit and drill the end of each cut along that bar to make sure that there's no sharp end to the cut that can shear open in the event that you accidentally go too far. The disadvantages to both of these, although more to this one than to that one, is the amount of shear stress you're putting on your steel. So you imagine you've got this really cool box-shaped weld and all that kind of stuff, and hopefully this is all welded up really well. You're then going to be prying on it. And then once you get it to a certain stage, like this is eventually going to look like that, right? That's going to be the bar. It's going to be this almost sine wave kind of function. You're eventually going to want to forge that out into a flat bar, which again is going to have those two boxes of pattern, right? And then nothing, and then two boxes of pattern. And then nothing. So you're going to still have the same result, except that you're going to lose a lot less material, which means you're going to get a longer bar out of it. So in closing, for this specific material, if I was to do it, because I don't have a metal cutting bandsaw at the moment, or a surface grinder or mill, I would end up doing an accordion cut. So I would probably end up doing the chunking method, rather than the saw cut method, because I don't really like the idea of the amount of shear stress that I have to put on it at this stage. I would probably wimp out and do the triangle method, take my pattern on the side, and I'd just deal with it. No, they don't come out as crisp. The other thing they don't do is get full depth. So a Felicietti flip, the Felicietti flip allows you to have perfect squares of explosion, right? So you've got perfect squares and triangles and like stuff of explosion. What you've got to realize is because you're cutting not all the way through, you can't cut all the way through in order to do this. You have to only cut like 2/3 of the way in. You're only going to get 2/3 of your pattern. So you imagine you're only going to get that. You're not going to get the full explosion. You're going to get half an explosion and the tip of the next one if you cut through the middle weld line. So you're only going to get half of the story. But then when you've book matched those, it's going to expand it out a little bit. And depending on how close together you put the triangles will depend on how large these random pattern areas are. I think this method would look really good on a sword or a long dagger or a long fighting knife. But on small knives, this pattern looks like crap because you can't have a lot of pattern in a small area because you end up with these blank areas. So yeah, that is the basis for how I would do this pattern. Why not salami slice and forge weld again? Yeah, last method is pretty much the most efficient as far as material loss goes, but you run a much higher risk of ruining the entire billet doing it, and therefore losing your entire billet, which means that you're losing that entire material, like all of that material. So you run the risks of doing it that way. And pretty much everyone I've seen that's tried this has lost at least 2 billets out of 3. Yeah, and low layers do look good. This explosion pattern, I believe, started out as 16 layers. Trying to get the light playing on it properly. That side's a little bit better. There we go. This billet started out at 16 layers, so the layers count up really quickly because you're doing those W's and then you're four-weighing it and you're getting it all together. You're losing a lot of that. You're gaining a lot of layers really quickly. But yeah, so for long material, this is a really good way to go because you end up with your interesting pattern, but you also don't have to worry about doing the Feliciati flip. Salami slice and forge weld. Yeah, I'm not sure what you mean like salami slice. Just like, you mean like cut the bar into sections and then stack it and weld it? You could do that, but then the pattern is still on the end of the bar. There have been people who've attempted to do square welds with this, where they've just cut the bar into sections, flipped them all into a bar, this long with the squares, and then tried to put them under a press or a hammer and forge weld them together this way. The problem is that the taller your billet, the more pilar stress you have. So you end up with a pillar that's going to collapse, and that makes it really difficult to forge weld. And that's what a lot of people find out when they do feather patterns, because you need to make the billet quite tall and wide in order to be able to cut the feather. And having anything that's tall and hot when you try and upset it, which is what you're doing when you're forge welding from the top, you end up with a lot of pillar stress, which means that the pillar wants to buckle. And if the pillar buckles while you're forge welding, that forge weld is just going to give way and you end up popping the billet in two. I wouldn't advise doing that method. So yeah, I would advise either one of these. A bologna cut. Yeah, so those are the methods I would choose for making a mosaic. Hopefully that was helpful. Now, I did see someone ask me earlier whether or not leaf spring and file steel would make a decent. Yeah. So for 2 or 3 squares, it would work okay. But then you've also got the idea of then you have to forge out the blade and thin it down. And when you do that, you're also putting shear stress on those welds. So you want to be really good with the welds. Hey, Sean, thank you, man. I really appreciate that, bud. Yeah, and from crushed W's, you can make a lot of different patterns. Now, someone asked me if leaf spring and file spring would make a decent pattern. While leaf spring and file steel do etch differently, what they don't do very well is weld. 5160, as a general rule, absolutely hates to weld in Damascus. It's something to do with the amount of chromium and silica in it. It just hates welding. It friggin' hates it. I can't get it to weld most of the time. So, yes, but. My advice would be to clean the surfaces really well and seal the billet completely. Do completely oxygen-free, so seal all of the seams to get a perfectly clean weld, because otherwise you're just going to be pushing shit uphill trying to get that done. I was worried I'd missed another super chat somewhere. Pernicious carbonation. Yeah, so leaf spring steel normally does not like to weld very well. So just take it with a grain of salt. You obviously can weld most steels, even stainless. Although if you're going to weld stainless steels, you have to completely seal the billet. There is no way to use flux on stainless that will work. Stainless does not weld in an oxygenated environment, even a slightly oxygenated environment. it needs perfectly sealed billets. But yeah, so there's a little bit of Damascus theory for you. Hopefully that was handy for some of you. I might do another video on Damascus theory in the future where I actually forge weld a billet up and show you what's going on, especially now that I've got my new forge, which is capable of forge welding temperatures quite easily, which is nice. I appreciate you guys being patient with me while I feel quite ill. I'm sorry that it's not as entertaining as me forging some stuff. Hopefully I can get over this, whatever it is, soon. I'm not having fun. So, yeah, no, I really appreciate it, guys. I'm sorry that I'm not as active as I should be. Sorry to my patrons. I did actually start filming the classes, but that's when I started getting this vertigo shit, and I haven't been able to forge properly in those days. I've just been kind of flip-flopping around trying to feel better. I have been working yeah, so if you did stainless, then hopefully you did seal the billet. I have been working hard at trying to get myself back into the forge. It's just that I can't push too hard because with vertigo, I don't want to potentially fall over in here and kill myself, because that wouldn't be good for anyone. I did manage to rehaft my 5-pound hammer that had broken. So that's now ready to go, ready to rock, which is nice. And I also rehafted my little 2-pound cross peen with a short handle because the long handle wasn't working very well. So I did, in Ignis Veritas and in Ferro Vitae. But yeah, so hopefully I'll feel better soon. Hans, make sure to respond to me on Instagram or Facebook or wherever. Send me a message so I can figure out what I'm doing. But thank you very much for watching. Next live stream I will do, if I'm well, I will do the scissors. If I'm not well, I will probably end up doing a forge review, forge builds. How's the arm feeling? Yeah, no, I mean it's better. That was a while ago, but you did? Okay, I'll check that out when I get off. Yeah, if I'm not better by next weekend, I'll do a forge build video, a live stream where I answer the questions about forges. So yeah, I am still here. I am still active. I might come out with a video this week, but it's likely to be a Sam rant, or Sam spiel, as some people call it. I'll be seeing the doctor on Monday, Sean. Promise. But yeah, so I appreciate the support during this period. It sucks, but then that's life. But yeah, so I hope you all stay well. I hope you all have a good time, and I will see you sometime this week with Sam spiel if I feel up to it. Otherwise, I'll see you next Saturday for a forge live stream. So yeah, thank you very much, guys. I'm gonna go lie down, I think. Anyway, guys, take it easy. Hopefully you have a better week than I'm having. See you later.